So hopefully you can see my desktop at the plane. So I'm going to switch screens here and see if you can you see that? Can you see my server now?
Yep.
Or not? Yeah? Okay, lovely. All right, so where was I up to? Okay. So I've, after that a bit of excitement, I've booted the machine and we've got VMware tools installed at this point. So the screen is able to respond to the Retina display I've got. And you do the same thing on your Windows machine as well. So it gives us a chance just to have a quick look at the dashboard, which is by default will boot up as the default interface for over the side here, the clue that we can see that this is actually a potentially a dashboard for your whole server farm is that we've got an option for local server, and we also have an option for all servers on the left-hand side there. So if I can go over to select it. So there's our local server, which is the machine we currently just installed, along with information about what's going on with it. And then we've also got all servers, which potentially would list any other available servers you could see up here. And we could choose which server we actually want to be looking at any particular time. So this interface is worth exploring because it's something you can use for a small network, one machine, or with multiple networks, multiple servers, sorry, you can do that. If we just go back up to the top here and I'll select dashboard again. Down the bottom here, we also get some information popping up here that allows us to configure certain things about our servers and also any other servers in our farm here. So we can choose options there as well. You can also elect to hide this information if you don't want to see it. That's an option there. I'm not going to bother tinkering with that just yet. You'll also see that it's given us some red boxes that are indicating whether it thinks there are some problems with the current local server. So it's flagged one event and 2 potential services as having problems. You can click on those and it will actually go and give you an update on what it thinks the problem is. So at the moment it's a bit concerned about our task scheduler, which we haven't configured yet, so I'm going to leave that for now. And it's got some challenges to do with our user access service, which is kind of interesting. We'll see if that fixes itself after we configure as well. I'm not too concerned because it's a fresh install and I know that really it hasn't had a chance to do anything. I'm not too concerned about those errors just yet until I've finished the basic configuration. I'll see if that sorts out the problems and it goes away of its own accord. So I'll sort of leave that alone. Let's go over and have a look at the local server tab again. And up here in the properties, you get some information about your particular server you've just installed. For example, we haven't done any updates yet. You can see that up there. You can also get the name of the server, which is rather important. We're going to look at that in just a moment. You can see the status of things like remote access and your firewall, what sort of connectivity you've got on your network as far as your network Ethernet adapters, or one or more will be listed there. And also some basic specs about your server itself. So because this is a virtual environment and we pre-configured it to think this way, it thinks it's got 2 gig of RAM and a 60 gig hard drive. You will notice though that it picks up the genuine processor that is actually firing the Mac, so it's showing an i9 processor as what actually the server is using, although we're not accessing all the cores on that for this particular virtual. Now, if you wanted to play with this and you weren't too sure what you're doing, just a reminder that you can take snapshots in VMware. So if you want to go and practice the steps we're going to be doing, you could just at this point decide that you want to take a snapshot. You'll do that through the VMware menu, or you can do it through the VMware front face, if you like. I don't know what the right term is to use for it, but basically it's management tools. If I go back here and bring up the library, which should be there somewhere. Oh, here it is. I'm staring at it. You can actually, there's my server. I can actually at this point go to the snapshots menu, and I could actually take a snapshot, which is this little camera icon here. So if I do that to show you, so we'll call that fresh install. And what that does is take a snapshot of the virtual machine running in its current configuration. So if I make a stuff up after this, or if I just want to be able to go back and practice these steps as many times as I want till I'm comfortable with it, I can get back to that starting point without having to reinstall the whole machine all over again. So just by selecting that snapshot and restoring it to that point. So it's a very handy tool when you're learning an operating system, because you can just wind things back to a given point anytime that you like. You can have as multiple snapshots as well, so there's no limit on snapshots beyond the physical space available on your hard drive, because every time you do a snapshot, effectively VMware is taking a complete dump of what's actually in the virtual environment at that particular point in time and saving it to a file. So it's not a particularly small file, so you may find yourself limited more likely by the amount of hard drive space you've got than you are by anything else. But it's actually still a very good feature, and I would encourage you in the next couple of days when you're playing with your virtual environment on that computer to think about taking some snapshots before you do any significant changes to it, just so you can wind it back if you make a mistake, or if you want to practice that again and see what happens. It's also a great way to learn, because you can try different things out, and in the back of your mind you know it's okay, because you can wind things back to a known configuration and everything will be fine at that point. Okay. Let's have a bit of a squeeze at another option here, which is file and storage services. So this allows us basically to access some of the hard drive volumes that we might have on our computer. At the present time, we just have a basic hard drive installation. You can see there, which is a C drive, and we've got maximum 60 gig. Now, the virtual machine is in the background managing that, so it's actually telling the operating system you've got 60 gigs. Even if the operating system isn't actually using that space on the physical hard drive on your computer. So that's one of the little tricks that the VMware software can do to fool the operating system into thinking it's on a real computer, on a real hardware platform, directly rather than going through a virtual environment. So that works pretty good. We can also see we've got things called storage pools, which we talk about in Cert 4, but basically we can create some of those sort of RAID type configurations. We can also merge storage spaces of different physical sizes and make them up into not just physical disks, but into virtual disks. So we can create a D drive that looks to our operating system to be a physical disk, but is actually made up of a number of actual physical disks that have been made into a virtual disk. So some quite clever things we can do in that space, but they go a little bit beyond what we need to worry about with Cert 3. So we're just going to stick with the default configuration for this. Now, there is a couple of things you need to be aware of before you do anything at all with a new, fresh server install. The first thing is you need to settle on a server name. That is really critical, because all the services and features that you add to your server past this point are going to use that server name to recognize what it's working with. So if you decide after you've installed a few services that you'd like to go back and change the name of the computer, you're in for a world of pain, because a lot of services are dependent on that name that you originally set. And so you probably are going to find that that will become unmanageable for you at some point. So golden rule, set the server name before you do any installation of software after a fresh install. There's another thing that we need to look at as well, which is to do with the network. And I did touch on this last term, so I'm going to throw it out to you guys. Can anyone remember the other thing we have to do before we start adding services and features as far as the network's concerned?
Bridged, unbridged.
Yeah, we did that. Yeah, so and if you think about our classroom environment that we were there, and I tell you to go to the file server, for example, to download a file, one of the reasons I didn't have to tell, this is to do with one of the reasons why I didn't have to tell you where it was, or you had to go searching for it. We did something with that file server. Same as we might do with a printer on our network. I was hoping Pete would have covered this with you.
Static IP stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, you have a static IP. Again, because it's a server device, you don't want this wandering around on your network getting different IP addresses. That could be rather frustrating. It may not work with all the services. So 2 things we do: name the computer, set a static IP address for the particular server. Those things you should do before you configure anything else. So at the moment, I'm on the local server screen here, and I'm seeing the properties for the server. So I've just clicked on the computer name, which currently has been set to something that Windows has thought up, which is wing-whatever. So in this location here, I can choose the change button, and I can actually change the name of the server. Now, in this environment where we're testing, it's not so critical what we call it, but you should ideally try and strive for something that has, you know, some meaning to the server. So depending on the situation. So, let's use so I've got server Launceston 01. I can change these later, and I will, but I'm going to leave this on workgroup at the moment. You remember what the main difference was between workgroup and domain?
Sharing.
Sorry? The domain means your computer is centrally managed, and workgroup means they're not. So if all your client machines are in a work group, the only way you're going to manage them remotely is if someone turns on remote desktop for a computer and allows you to access it that way. So yes, that could be a challenge for folks at the moment, the current circumstances, if they've got to manage computers, because they would have to most likely go to the offices to manage them. In the classroom at Launceston, we have it configured as a work group. I don't have remote access turned on, and it wouldn't be able to do it anyway because DOE blocks it. So the only way I can reconfigure those machines if I need to is I have to physically go there, which at the moment I can't. So I'm kind of snookered. If it was on a domain, I potentially could access that using these tools from my home if I configured it that way and do things that way. So I'm going to leave it on workgroup for now, but we'll change that a bit later. All right, so I'll okay that. Now, because we're making a fairly significant change and a lot of our services depend on that, we're going to have to reboot the machine at this point to let it take that name change. So I'm going to go ahead and let it do that. And we'll let it reboot because it's a virtual on this machine. It will boot pretty quick anyway, so it's no big deal. Okay. All right, so the other thing we need to do is set an IP address. Now, on your home computers, the ones you'll be testing your server on, it's not really going to matter terribly much because you're probably not going to have it connected to anything else. So you can just choose an IP address range that you like. You can use one of the C-class IP address ranges like I've got on my network at home, so 192 or 10.0 or whatever, something along those sort of lines, and set it up. I'm not going to risk pressing the wrong key here, so I'm going to do it this way, just in case. All right, there we go. So you can still see my screen okay? Yeah?
Yep.
We can.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so I'm back in. If we look up the top there, you see it's now changed the server name. Okay. The other thing we're going to look at is the Ethernet. So I'm going to click on that. That is just a shortcut to bring up the network connections. By the way, we could have renamed the computer and assigned the IP address the way that we've done in the Windows 10 machines by going in here, or we could right click on our connections down here, all those kind of things. All those shortcuts that work with Windows 10 would work just fine here as well if you want to use those. It's just that the this properties window makes it very easy for us to get to things. Okay, now if this was a production machine, I would probably do a few things here. The first thing I'd probably do is rename the connection. So has Pete talked to you about green, blue and red networks? And orange?
Yes,
That
he
ring-
did briefly in term 1, I think.
Yeah.
Oh.
So you remember what the green means?
No.
No? So green means it's internal. It's on the LAN. If it was a red, that means it's going outside the LAN. So if you had a connection to the internet on this server, we would label that red. If you have this connection, we'd label it blue. And if you have a direct connection with no firewall, no intermediate steps, which does anyone know what that's called?
Dangerous.
Well, it starts with DMZ. Anyone know what that stands for? You guys should know all this. That's interesting. Demilitarized zone. So that means basically, that basically means you've got a direct connection and we ain't blocking, filtering, doing anything. So it's potentially very dangerous. Sometimes gamers, when they have problems with connections to their game servers and things, go, "Oh, just set up your router and point your game machine as a DMZ." It will fix the problem. It also means that everyone from China and Russia can also join in, not perhaps with the game you're playing. So it should be used with extreme caution unless you actually know what you're doing, because you can potentially compromise your machines. So I'm going to set this particular machine up with a green network. That it's only going to be used on my local area network. I'm not expecting this machine to be doing anything too dramatic outside of the network here. I've only net port, which is a bit unusual for a server as well. Typically, servers will have multiple network ports on them. Okay, so I'm now going to go into the properties for this network connection, and you've got a few options here you can change. Pardon me. For the sake of testing, and for us learning networking, I'm going to turn off the TCP/IP version 6 protocol, because it works fine. It just adds a level of complexity that can be a bit confusing when we're starting out with networking. So I'm just going to have the server behave as a TCP/4, IPv4 network, which is what we're familiar with. So if I bring up the properties for that, you can see at the moment that it's currently getting its IP address automatically, which is fine if it was just a workstation, but as we said earlier, we want this to have a static IP address. Before I can assign a static IP address, I have to be aware that the IP address that I want to use is actually available. So typically on a network for a business, you would actually have taken a few minutes out before you started configuring your network to work out the IP address ranges that you're going to reserve for things like servers and printers and other fixed devices, and what range of IP addresses you are happy for your DHCP server to manage for you. And you would assign the server into the IP address range of fixed devices. Now, I'm fairly confident I know what IP addresses I've got on my network that are free, so I could put that straight in there. But if I wasn't sure, say I was at a client's business, one of the things I could do as a quick test is I could try and do a ping. If I can just make that a bit bigger for you, give me a sec. So we'll go in there and we'll change the font size. Okay, so I'll do a ping and I can say, okay, I'm thinking of assigning, unlock on. That's my actual IP address range. So I'm thinking of assigning this 15. So what I'm going to do is try and ping that IP address. Now, if I get a response, that's a clear indication that some device is already configured to use that IP address. Now, it may be possible that the device on the other end is still there. It's just been set up to not respond to pings. That's always possible as well. In this particular case, it's just one last check you can do and see if it helps. So in this case, I certainly didn't get a response from 15. My DNS server got a bit confused about what I was trying to do there. So I'm going to go with that. So I'll go back in here and I'm going to set up 192.168.0.15 as my IP address. And if I press tab, it will give me a default subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. Does anyone know what that's telling me? Did you guys do this? Just ringing a bell? No? Did you talk about IP address ranges? How you can set them up to larger or smaller numbers of IP addresses in a pool? Is that ringing a bell with anyone? Did you do Cypher, like /24?
We did, but I can't remember it.
Okay. So the subnet mask there is this is a cipher of /24, which basically means I've got 254 potential IP addresses on this network. If you don't need that many, it's often a good idea to actually change the subnet mask to a smaller number, okay? Calculators online, if you just do a quick Google on subnet mask and calculator, you'll find a heap of sites that have got these little calculators that you can pull up and actually will explain to you what settings to put in there and then what available range of IP addresses you will have, okay? So I'm leaving on that because that's my default subnet mask for my home network. I don't know why. I don't really have 254 devices, but I live in hope. Next step is I need to set up the default gateway. Now, again, you shouldn't make assumptions about gateways or that. You should go and try and find that information. In a good network, that information should be clearly documented and available to you in a manual, ideally one that's available electronically as well as printed. So there should be that. If you're actually managing a small business and you're doing a PC support role, then you should have that information available and recorded somewhere that's accessible to you and other people that might support that business. If you're doing a help desk role, you should have some software or some system in place that allows you to record that information so you can access it when you need it. Okay, so if I wasn't sure the default gateway, I know it, but if we're just pretending we didn't know for this exercise, what I could do is try an ipconfig/all, and that's going to give me a whole heap of information here because we're on the virtual network here. But you can see there the default gateway is 192.168.0.5. Now, a lot of because it's a home network, I then would have set that to 1, but it's not. So again, that's a good reason why you want to check these things and not just assume that you've got that figured out. So in this case, it's going to be that. So let's go back to our configuration here, and we'll put that information in. So I'm going to put that to 5. I also noticed my DNS server information was displayed for me there as well. Again, it should be documented, but if you can't find the documentation, this will help you. You can see that I've got two DNS servers configured on my network. I've got a separate one sitting on 210, and I've also got the gateway acting as a DNS server as well on 5. So I'm going to go with the 210, which is my dedicated server. So we're going to put that in, 192.168. The reason I'm using the 210 as my preferred one is because it also recognises all my local devices. So I can, let's for you in just a sec. So to make a bit more sense of that, but just let me type these in first. So we'll put that in and we'll make that 5. Okay, so I've got a static IP address assigned to 15, which I'm reasonably confident is not being shared by any other device on my network. At this point, I'll be documenting that. It's going to be going through my default gateway for my home network, which is on 5, and it's going to be using my preferred DNS server 210. If that fails, it's not accessible for some reason, it will fall back to using the alternative, which is 5. Key difference between those two DNS servers, 192.168.0.5 can resolve IP addresses on the internet. The 210 server can resolve internet addresses as well as internal LAN addresses. So I'm going to explain, or I'm going to give you a demonstration of what that 210 does for me in a moment. So just OK that, and we close. All right, so let's see what that means when I said it's resolving internal addresses. So if I just bring switch screens here, so bear with me. I've got key presses going everywhere. There we go. So if I bring across my my web browser here, normally what I can do is I can go and put in kingtree.it.local 5000, and that's going to bring up my one of my local NASs in a moment. It's a bit slow because it's the GUI's on a low priority, so it's a bit slow to update. But basically, that brings up my NAS, one of my NASs, so I can see what's in it and configure it and do things with it. So I don't have to remember its IP address, in other words, because the DNS server recognises that as a valid address, URL address, and just translates the IP address for my web browser and takes it straight there. If I want to look at my other NAS, which is called Freddo, it's just freddo.it-local-5000. And if I want to look at my third one, it's got another name. So it's the same principle. So I can pull them all up in any given order whenever I want. I don't have to remember IP addressing to do it. So that's what that 210 is doing for me. If that 210 DNS server should fail or become unavailable, I can still get to this NAS. However, I'm going to have to use the actual IP address, because that resolution of the name to the IP address won't be available to me on the 05 DNS server. It will look at it, and if I put google.com, it'll go, that's on the internet. I can go to the internet and resolve that name, so I'll do that now. If I type a local name that's within my network, then it's going to go, I don't know what that means. I have no idea what Kingtree means. I can't find it. You'll have to figure it out. So the backup server, a DNS server I've got on my server is better than nothing, but ideally I want to use 210 where I can. Is that making some sense to folks, what I've just tried to explain there? Deathly silence. That's not encouraging.
I'm got a question. I'm confused. My default gateway, like I'm looking at my personal computer here.
Yeah.
It's got a percentage. So it's got a string of 4, then nothing, and then another string of 3, but one of the numbers in the 3 has a percentage mark instead of a number. Which
in the gateway.
In my gateway, yes.
That's a bit odd. What sort of device are you using? Wireless, or how you connect?
Ethernet.
Not sure. Well, you're getting a percentage in there. You shouldn't be getting that for your IP address. You should. No, that doesn't sound right.
And also another percentage mark comes up in my IP6 address, but I don't know enough about that to find that weird.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we might have to look at that afterwards and why that is. Yeah, I know. I'm not seeing why you're seeing it in that situation. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Okay, so Lee, you've asked, is it a gateway or a default setting thing, MAC address thing? What do you mean by that question, sorry?
Oh, no, that was just in answer to Aaron's question.
Oh, to trying to work out what it is. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure myself. I'm not a networking guy, but I know where I use that sign in networking, and it's not where I would expect to see it. So I'll have to look at that a bit more afterwards and see if we can figure it out, and I'll tell everyone what we've found. So you mentioned an interesting thing there with the MAC address too. So just as a bit of revision, can anyone tell me what the MAC address is, the benefit of the MAC address is for us?
It's the physical address of your computer.
Yeah. I in my mind, when I'm trying to remember these concepts, I think of it a bit like because I'm a car person, I think of it a bit like what they call a VIN number on a car.
Yeah, VIN number,
so
serial number.
Yeah, when your car's made, they punch that into the car, and that's unique to your car. And no matter where you are in Australia, or no matter what state you registered in, your license plate might change, but that VIN number always stays the same. And in some respects, the IP address we're putting on our computers is a bit like the license. Yeah. All right, so we've now set up our server. It's got its own name, which we're happy with, and it's also got its own IP address. And I can see in the properties up here, if I check, that both of those things are there, okay? So that's really important. We can't do anything else with our virtual machines until we've got to this point and we've got those two things configured. I would strongly recommend once you've done that, that what you should do is go back to the VMware tools and then take a snapshot at that point, okay? So that you've got that as a point. So you put something like basic config done. That way, if you want to run the services on server, you can wind your machine back to that point at any. Last thing I want to say about this before we move on is just to remember that if you're doing this exercise at home and you're using the machines that we've given you and they're not plugged into your network, then obviously when you do an IP config, you're not going to get any results because your computer cannot configure its IP address based on your network. So what you'll get back is an IP address starting with 169, which means basically that Windows Server attempted to find a DHCP server, couldn't find one obviously because you're not plugged into a network, and so it's come back with a default IP address which starting with 169, which indicates that it actually isn't able to find a network. Having said that, you can still assign a static IP address to it, even if it's not plugged into a network. So you can still go ahead and do what I've done here if you wanted to, and set up your machine to be 192.168.0.1 or 0.10 or whatever you want it to be. You can still give it a gateway if you want. You can still give it a DNS. Just those things don't really mean anything in this case because you're not physically connected to anything. But you can still go through the exercise of setting those things up so you can try them out, okay, and see how they work. That's still possible. Everything we're going to do in our exercises with configuring a server is based on us getting to this point. So it is going to be really critical for you that you get there. To do what you've done today, just to recap and summarise, you're going to need to first of all download the evaluation copy of Windows Server, either from Teams in our files folder, or you can go to the Microsoft Evaluation Centre and download a copy from there if you wish. You'll be using VMware Workstation, so you need to go into the Teams and find that link that I gave you a bit earlier this morning. If I just go back to that, so I'll bring that back up on your screen.
How big is the file?
It is a fair size. And
Okay.
remember I asked you, yeah, I did ask you the other day about whether you had some capacity.
Yeah,
So it's going to be about
overnight.
5 or 6 gigabytes. Okay. And I know it's going to take a while because everyone's going to have different networks and maybe someone else in your home is using the network right now and you can't slow them down or whatever. So I appreciate that's going to be a bit of a for some of you.
Sorry.
So I'm not expecting you to get this, done instantly.